Hello everyone, this is Direwolf20 and welcome to part 5, holy cow, of Direwolf20's Mod Spotlight. This time taking a look at Endergenic generators. There's a lot to take a look at because Endergenic generators are cool. They're a lot of fun to build. If you build them properly and build them well and do a good job, you might have a very powerful energy system that can convert one Ender Pearl into lots of RF. Currently we're producing somewhere around 9 to 10,000 RF per tick, and in total, Ender Pearls are producing around 2 to 3 million RF total. And that's not the most efficient way to do it. It's up to you to come up with some really efficient or really interesting ways to build these Endergenic generators. So how do they work, and what do you do to make one? Well, I don't know. That's a lie, I do know. By the way, that Pearl generated around 3 million, maybe 4. So we're going to go over all the details about how to build Endergenic generators. Some of the things you're going to need to know. I'm going to show you the basics of building one, but then it's up to you to build even more efficient ones and even better ones. All right? So, without further ado, it's Endergenic generator time. Step 1, read the manual. Advanced power system. So basically what happens is, scientists discovered that in the end, there's a weird property with Ender Pearls. When you throw them, you can harness the energy and convert it to RF. But every time it's thrown, it can generate some more energy. And this can loop almost forever, provided that you set up your system correctly. It's all about timing with this system. You have to time the throwing of items correctly, and it's down to the tick. So you really need some complex mechanics to make sure that your timers are working exactly right. So the first thing you're going to need is an Endergenic generator. All right, this block can exist in 3 different states, okay? The first state is idle, means it's just sitting there doing nothing, okay? So we're going to go down here, and we're going to drop down an Endergenic generator. Let's put one right about here. Does that look pretty cool? I'm just trying to figure out how I placed it over here. Yeah, I think it was, yeah, that looks good. Okay, so these Endergenic generators just kind of sit there and they're idle. I'm going to place 2 of them just for now, but eventually we'll expand to 4. Okay, so in idle mode, they're just sitting there not doing anything. Cool. The next mode occurs when you give it a redstone pulse. As soon as you pulse it, it gets into charging mode. This mode is sitting there waiting to receive a pearl that's thrown from an adjacent generator. And you can link these in a way that I'll show you in a moment. Once it receives the pearl, it's in holding mode. Now that it's holding on to the pearl, it's ready to throw it again by giving it another redstone pulse to the next generator. So basically, all you're trying to do is build it so that your Endergenic generators are tossing pearls around. And that's what the blinking is. They're just tossing pearls between each other in that pattern, in a circle, over and over and over again. And every time it throws a pearl, it generates some energy. Well, that's not true. Every time it receives a pearl, it generates some energy. All right? And we'll take a look at how that works in depth. Now, there's a trick, because you can't just throw them whenever you want. Like I said, it's all about timing. Charging mode is a 15-tick cycle. The most optimal time to capture a pearl is at tick 10. So basically, you have to wait 10 ticks between the point that you give it a redstone pulse and the point that the Ender Pearl arrives. So that's exactly half a second. So 10 ticks, you give it a pulse, 10 ticks later, the pearl should arrive. Anything more or less than 10 ticks, and you'll generate less energy than is optimal. Once the pearl is received, it'll go into the holding mode, right? What happens in holding mode is it starts using energy to hold onto that pearl. That pearl is so energetic, it has to use some of the RF that it's generating to hold onto it. So you quickly want to give it a redstone pulse, almost either on the same tick that it arrives or 1 tick later. Every tick that you wait in order to throw the pearl is wasted energy. Also, there's a chance that while you're holding it, it will go ahead and be destroyed. Cool. So it's very possible that you'll destroy a pearl while it's being held. Let's go ahead and figure out how we can build a system that should be pretty cool to demonstrate how this works. Luckily, there's a good way to figure it out. I recommend the One Probe, which is a mod by McJady. This will show you way more detailed information about what's happening here. When you hold shift, you can see lots of information. You can open up the UI as well to see a bunch of information. And I'll demonstrate how all this works in a minute. Now, there's only other block that I haven't described to you yet, and that is the pearl injector. Okay, this block is responsible for injecting a pearl into the system, and it's over here. This drops your Ender Pearl into the first Endergenic generator and kicks it off to the next one. So that's pretty much the block that's responsible for firing the pearl. And it's the first one, and then boom, it runs in a cycle. So one pearl was injected in the system, and it's going to keep on looping through until one of those random occurrences happen where the pearl is destroyed. And that's what happened over here. Random pearl discard. It got destroyed. And you can see in total we're generating lots of RF from this. Sweet. Now I want to have a system where when I press the button, there is a quick pulse, but a single button press lasts for actually a long time by comparison to what a single tick is. This is a single tick. You ready? See the difference? That's the difference. So for this reason, I'm going to have sequencers on either side here, all set to activate 1 tick after the button is pressed. That is 1/20th of a second. Okay. From there, we're probably going to use insulated redstone conduit, or the redstone conduit of your choice, simply because redstone conduits don't have a loss as it relates to redstone signal. The redstone signal doesn't degrade. And because we're actually looping this around quite a bit, you probably could use redstone dust in this design if you wanted to, but I'm using conduit, so use whatever you want. So basically what happens is, 1 tick after I press the button, it's going to activate this wire. And then 1 tick after this wire is activated. And you also want to set all these to once too, because this is going to be looping more frequently than the cycle completes. So you want to make sure when a redstone signal is received, loop the cycle once, restart on a new pulse arriving. In once 1 mode, it doesn't restart. Ignore further pulses. So make sure once 2 is the sequencer of choice. Okay. So basically, press the button, 1 tick later, this line lights up. 1 tick later, this line lights up. Right around tick number 12. Okay. Now there's a catch. It takes time for those pearls to fly from one Endergenic generator to another. And when you link them, it tells you. It's a distance of 2 ticks. So basically what happens is, at tick number 2, right, this guy's going to activate, right? 1 tick, 2 tick. But it takes 2 ticks for this to get over here, right? And we want this guy to receive his pearl 10 ticks after he's received his redstone pulse. So we want this guy to receive his pearl on tick number 12, because he gets the first pulse at 2, so 10 ticks later is tick number 12. So let's set that up. We're going to run conduits over here, and then we're going to have another sequencer set up that says, remember this is 1 tick later, so this will be tick 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let's see if that's what I did over here. Yep, cool. And then what's going to happen is we're going to have this guy shoot the pearl. Okay, so what we should see is this guy fire a pearl over to here, and he should arrive at tick number 10. And we'll know that's the case because we can watch him with the 1 probe. So let's get some ender pearls. And press the button to see what happens. Okay. Last pearl arrived at tick number 11, so I was off a little bit. Okay, so let's bump this up 1 more. I want to make sure all my settings are correct. I think so. So I had to tweak these a little bit to do some crazy things, but we're pretty good. Let's see what happens. And we have to get into tick details in the way Minecraft works. So that's probably going to want to run here. And we should see last pearl arrived at 10. So that's important. Now also see that there's energy being lost. That's a bad thing. You don't want to lose energy. The reason we're losing energy is because the pearl arrives and we're holding on to it. So we haven't fired it anywhere. All we did is it arrived, we started generating energy, but then we held on to it and eventually it expired. And that's a bummer. But we did generate some power. And you can also see here, when we look in the UI, average over the last 5 seconds, 126 RF per tick. Not bad. Not bad. So how do we fire this pearl? Well, we need to give it a redstone pulse. First, I'm going to send this destination. It's 2 ticks away. So pretty much we also want this guy to be ready. So a short period of time after saying you get ready to wait for a pearl, we're going to tell this guy to be ready to wait for a pearl. This again needs to be on once 2, and I'm going to say it'll probably be around 2 or 3 ticks later. What do I have over here? Trust me when I say once you start building this, you're going to have to manipulate things a little bit and play with some of the timings and just use the one probe to figure out what kind of settings you want to have. Now we want to know when this Endergenic generator has fired his pearl, and luckily there's the Ender monitor. All this does is emit a redstone signal on one of three criteria. Either one, when it lost a pearl. So when a pearl was destroyed, you can say, hey, emit a redstone signal. You can also do it when the pearl is fired, or when the pearl has arrived in the generator. So I'm going to go pearl fired, right? So as soon as we fire the pearl, we know it takes 2 ticks to get there. So I'm going to say about 3 ticks later, we're going to want to fire it again, okay? So this will wait an extra tick. It'll hold on to it for 1 tick, and then it'll fire it to the next one. Let's see what happens, if I've set this up correctly. Boom. Nice. Look at that. We got 256 RF a tick. We gained about 25,000 from that, and it fired it right away, which is awesome. You can see that's actually working pretty well. Over here, last pearl arrived at 9, which means it arrived at tick number 9 instead of tick number 10. That's not ideal. So let's shorten this length a little bit. And we'll see what happened now. Arrived at 10, and it also discarded it. Okay, so that makes sense, because we didn't have anywhere for it to fire to. So now we kind of repeat the process, right? We want this guy to fire over to here. And we know it takes about 2 ticks for it to arrive, so we're going to say 3 ticks later, and make sure to set this to pearl fired. Cool. We can also make sure to indicate to this guy that a few ticks later, we want to activate him. And again, you're going to have to play with the timing a little bit. I'm going to start with this, make sure it's set to once too, because this is eventually going to be in a loop, and then we'll see what happens, right? So what should happen is this one will receive its pearl and immediately fire it. 3 ticks later, this guy receives it and immediately fires it. And then once this guy fires, he receives it and fires it onto this one. Cool? So let's see how the timing works out on these guys. So this guy arrived at 10, this guy arrived at 10, and this guy arrived at 11. So we need to tweak the timing on this a little bit. So probably that. And notice that it says stats over the last 5 seconds, so sometimes you have to wait a few seconds to see where it's at. Last pearl arrived at 10, so you can see we lost the pearl because we held on to it for too long again. But all these other ones are working pretty well. Sweet. Now to get it into a loop, right? So one more set of Ender monitor. Pearl fired. And then we'll do something like you, once 2. Okay, and make sure that you are linked to you. Distance of 2 ticks. Sweet. And we'll put our sequencer here. Hook that up, and you should probably be around 3 or 4. Yeah, we'll go with 3, and we'll see what happens. And make sure to set it to once 2. Okay. So we know you should be good. Arrived at 10, arrived at 10, arrived at 10, and you, pearl, arrived while idle. What's up with that? So this is when we get into some of the complexities of the timing of this system. You actually need to delay this a little bit because this pearl winds up firing on tick number, what is this, 9 or 10? And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, somewhere around there ticks before this receives its signal. So what happens is we tell you to start waiting before we fire the pearl, and that's a problem. So let's bump this up a little bit and see if we can't get it to behave. Okay, and you'll know, see, last pearl arrived at 11. That's cool. Now if we bump this up a little bit more, last pearl arrived at 10. Sweet. So we got into a good point. Now, you'll also notice that some of the tick variations, if you get really minute with this, are sometimes weird. That's because of the way Minecraft ticks tile entities. This is just a pure concept of how vanilla Minecraft works, and it's really hard for the mod author McJady to work around. So, long story short, occasionally you might need to add or remove a tick here, because tile entities in a chunk are ticked in a certain order. And sometimes, this one will tick before this block does, for example. And we never notice it in vanilla Minecraft or in most mods because we're talking literally 1/20th of a second, right? So 5 milliseconds. It's something that your brain will never notice. But when you're playing with ticks like this and you're counting individual ticks, you might notice it. So keep that in mind. So at this point, we've got this working pretty well. The pearl comes in, he fires over to here, this one fires over to here, this one fires over to here, and this one fires over to here. This one doesn't fire though. So let's go ahead and set that up. So it should be pretty easy at this point, right? Pearl fired, and then we have our sequencer, and we'll say about 3 ticks later, and let's see what happens. Cool. So this guy, pearl arrived at 10. This guy, pearl arrived while idle. Why is he idle? Oh, that's right. We only told him once throughout this process, hey, go ahead and start waiting for a pearl. The second time through the loop, it wasn't waiting for the pearl. It hadn't received another redstone signal since it fired the first one away. So we now have to loop this. And that's what this little piece of mechanic is about here. We have an ender monitor so that the first time we fire it, we can have a little delay that says, hey, I want you to restart the loop. So this kind of restarts the loop every time it fires from the first generator. And this guy is set to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll have to see, because like I said, tick timing is a little bit different. So you can't always count on the tick timings to be perfect. Okay, but we'll do this and we'll make it once too. So that should be good. And we're gonna want you set to when the pearl is fired. And yeah, I know, dire wire. It's a little dire wiry, but it works, trust me. Okay, and let's see what happens when I fire this guy. Hey, it's kind of working. Nice. Now you want to keep an eye on things, like pearls arriving at tick 12, pearls arriving at tick 11, so there's some tick loss in between every now and then. You might need to tweak some of these numbers. You're going to have to play with this, trust me, because it's going to just require you getting your head wrapped around how it works. But pretty much all around, you should be in pretty good shape, and you should be able to come up with a good way for things to work. Now, this is not the perfectly designed system. There might be some tweaks and changes to the timing that you need to do in order for it to work. By the way, each of these 4 devices generates RF. So you're going to want to hook your power. As you can see underground here, I've got power hooked up to all 4 of them, all feeding into this guy. Once you get your timings right, and trust me, these timings aren't perfect. Some of these, the ticks or the ender pearls are arriving at tick 9 instead of tick 10. See, last pearl arrived at 9. But it's in pretty good shape. And like I said, we're getting a decent amount of power from each pearl, and we're getting a decent amount of RF per tick. Not bad, right? So that's the Endergenic generator. There's a little bit of randomness to it in terms of when it might lose a pearl, and it really requires timing. This is not perfect. A better system exists. This is just a demonstration of maybe like a middle-of-the-road system. The timings need to be tweaked a little bit, but trust me when I say I've spent about an hour or 2 figuring out how to get this one working, and you could really spend a lot of time doing this. So that is the Endergenic generator system. Now there's one thing I didn't show you guys because I've been using the probe, but also if you hold the smart wrench in your hand, you'll see these little, I'm going to take off the chunk lines, you'll see these little, blurbs above the thing showing you how things are going. These are more real-time, so you can kind of see them all at once. It's a nice way to debug your system. So you can see last pearl arrived while idle, last pearl arrived at 10, right? RF gain and loss. Definitely a good way to debug your whole system at once is just to hold this in your hand. And you'll see those metrics start to change. Cool. So quite a bit of RF gain. A little bit lost, again, because my timing is not perfect. But we're getting around 10,000 RF per tick in a not perfect system. You could do better. Just requires a little bit of complexity, math, and playing around. So trust me, just play with it. You'll get the hang of it after a while. Hopefully you guys understand how Endergenic generators work. If you don't, then I guess watch the video again or read the book. Those are pretty much your options. There's lots of guides out there. Lots of people have come up with many different ways to do this. So you can Google around and find some options. But this is probably a good system that'll get you started. For now, Darwell20 signing off. Hope you enjoyed checking out the spotlight covering Endergenic generators. This wraps up all of RFTools for now. Who knows what McJD will add in the future. Next up, we'll probably be taking a look at RF dimensions and then eventually RF control. For now, take it easy.